Today, we're going to be covering the dreaded foul trouble scenario. That's right. Your player just picked up their second foul in the first half. We're going to take a look at some scenarios and see the best action. And we're going to also contest some of the old school thoughts out there about foul trouble. What if your actions and what if you being afraid of that player fouling out is actually doing more harm than actually him being in foul trouble? So let's take a look at some scenarios and talk about it. For context for this conversation, so we're going to look at a high school basketball game where we're at 5 fouls and you're out. For some, 2 fouls in the first half, no matter when it is an automatic sit that player and rest him for the half. The thinking is that they'll have 2 more fouls in the second half and still be able to play. And obviously, if they got their third in the second half, then they would foul out. At first glance, this might seem obvious, but is it? We're going to challenge that belief a little bit and think more outside the box on this scenario. And I think I have personally seen in some scenarios where the fear of that player fouling out limits their playing time more than if the kid actually would have fouled out. Here's what I mean by that. So let's say a player gets his second foul at the very end of the first quarter. So just a quarter in, he's already had 2 fouls. You sit him for the rest of the half, so he just sat 8 minutes. And if the rest of the game goes fine, he plays a total of 24 minutes. So here's the question, and here's the challenge of that thinking. Let's say you let him play through it, play the entire rest of the game. Do you think that he's going to foul out by the end of the third quarter? Because if he fouls out totally, completely by the end of the third quarter, he would have actually played the exact same amount of minutes. So he would have played 24 minutes. So in the first scenario, he's taken out for a whole quarter. In the second scenario, he fouls out and is on the bench and fouled out for a full quarter. So, question, what's the likelihood that that player is going to foul out if he was left out there by the third quarter? Now, some kids, you're like, yeah, they're definitely going to foul out by then. Other kids and other scenarios, they're not going to. If he made it through, you left him in, and he made it through halfway through the fourth quarter before fouling out, he literally would have played 4 more minutes in that game compared to the first scenario, sitting him the entire second quarter. So he would have played 28 minutes instead of 24 minutes. How many points would that points, rebounds, assists, steals, blocks, impactful plays, defensive stops, how many impactful plays is that kid worth in 4 minutes? But you say, well, yeah, then you're not going to have that kid for crunch time, the most important part of the game. But if you look at it this way, 2 points in the second quarter counts the same amount as 2 points in the fourth quarter or 2 points in the last minute of the game. It counts exactly the same. Now, all we're trying to do is just have you think, right? Think through this and not be a person that's a robot and just doing something because you've seen other coaches do it or your old coach did it for you or whatever the case may be. And it's fine if you know you're going to take that kid out and sit them for foul trouble, but you need to know why. Okay, second thing to consider. So first thing to consider was the game time total amount of game time. Second thing to consider is flow, player getting out of flow of the game and having to sit a long time. So how many times have we seen a player that's in foul trouble actually have a bad game? Is it because he was in foul trouble, or is it because the foul trouble caused him to get out of the flow of the game? Hey, in that first scenario where the player gets 2 fouls at the end of the first quarter and you sit him, but just realize what's going to happen. He wouldn't play for 8 straight game minutes. Then you're going to go into halftime for another 10 minutes. So if you were to count actual minutes not played, he's going to sat for about 30 minutes. So 30 minutes of being outside the game flow, that's obviously hard to overcome. Let's compare it to another sport. So take a look at the NFL. the fourth down. Those of you guys watch football, the fourth down. Think of a few years ago, 10 years ago, it was somewhat rare and not common for a coach to go for it on fourth down, say 1 yard or 2 yards. It wasn't very common at all. So now why is it common? Why is it common to see that? Every game you watch, you'll see a coach go for it on fourth down now. So why is that? Because coaches woke up to the fact that doing something was smarter and the gamble paid off more times than not. And the numbers, the analytics, the data suggested a different story, and it suggested a different reality from what they had been taught. And obviously, there's different scenarios with going on fourth down. You don't see every team go for it on fourth down. Depends on field position, depends on clock, lots of different reasons. Now, I think keeping a player in the game with a little bit of foul trouble is now like going for it on fourth down. I think a lot of times it makes sense to do it. So let's take a look at some specific scenarios and see what we're talking about. Just like with the football scenario, leaving a kid in is sometimes going to backfire. So we have to be prepared for that and ready for that. We don't have a crystal ball, and there's no such thing as a blanket rule that should be done in every situation. So every situation is different. Again, knowing why you're doing something is better than just doing something because it's always been done. Okay, first scenario. So here's a scenario. Your best scorer just picked up his second foul. Now his second quarter, 4 minutes left on the clock. So halfway through the second quarter, tied game. Other details, because we need to factor in other details. So other details we're thinking about here, he's not guarding an aggressive offensive player. He just has hit 2 threes in this quarter. And he just sat and he just had a rest from the start of the second quarter for about 2 minutes. So he's been in the game since the start of the second quarter, he's been in the game 2 minutes. In this scenario, I'm leaving him in because of those factors that we just said. He's already had a rest. He's somewhat hot on the offensive end. So he's already making impactful plays, and he's not guarding a super aggressive offensive player. Now, there's going to be other factors that you can go off of, but in this scenario, I'm leaving him in. Scenario number 2, your best post defender, so your big guy, your number 5 guy, just picked up his second foul. Time is second quarter, 2 minutes on the clock, 2 minutes left on the clock, and you're up by 10 points. Other details, he doesn't score much, but he's important in screening and obviously on the defensive end. He's been playing great. He usually sits for a rest about halfway through the second quarter, but he hasn't because he's just been playing great so far. So he hasn't sat. We're playing a very aggressive team that challenges the rim constantly, so they're driving at the rim constantly. In this scenario, because of who we're playing, his role on the team, the fact that he hasn't taken a rest, I'll take him out. So I'll sit him for the rest of the quarter in this scenario. Scenario 3, your point guard just picked up his second foul. First quarter, so early. 2 minutes on the clock, so super early. He picks up 2 quick fouls. Tied game. Other details, his backup is young, inexperienced. He rarely has finished a game with 4 fouls. He's never really fouled out of a game, and he's your smartest player. And the last foul was actually a bad call. In this situation, I'm getting him a longer than normal rest and getting him back in there because of those things that we listed already. And again, that comes down to scenarios, knowing your players, what's happening in the game, time on the clock, all those factors. But for this one, I'm going to give him a longer rest than normal. So he's going to sit at least the end of that first quarter. And I'm probably going to get him back in there about halfway through that second quarter. Scenario 4. All right, your third best player just picked up his 4th foul. So we're going to go into the second half with this scenario. There's 6 minutes left on the clock in the 4th quarter. The other team has just went on an 8-0 run, and now they're up by 8. So let's look at the details of what's happening. If you don't cut this lead back down quickly, the game might be over anyway. Now, in this scenario, he's your third best player. He has a capable backup. And his other teammates can carry the load also if needed, offensive end. And you have other options that can carry the load. Another scenario is we're playing a zone defense right now. In this scenario, what I'm doing is I'm going to give him a quick rest and get him back in there. If he has a capable backup, don't be afraid for him to foul out. He has a capable backup. He has other teammates right now that can carry the load and get us back into it. And then also the factor we're playing zone defense. Sometimes offenses against the zone defense can get a little bit more passive and start shooting jumpers instead of attacking. Okay, to recap, so I just think that there shouldn't be a hard rule with foul trouble that you go by. I think you should have an idea of what you want to do, but no hard rules. It just depends on the situation. With any gamble, sometimes it's going to backfire. You can't be afraid of that. You can't be afraid to go for the win. You can't be afraid to do something that's a little bit different because you think that you might look stupid. You got to be willing to do it. You got to be willing to go on fourth down sometimes. I think often coaches are taking players out and we're punishing ourselves and we're punishing our teams from that fear of fouling out way more than if the kid, you just left him in the whole time and he actually fouled out. More often than not, the kid getting sat by us to keep him out of foul trouble is hurting his minutes more. All right, guys. Well, hope you have a great day.